Conflict resolution is conceptualized as the methods and processes involved in facilitating the peaceful ending of conflict and retribution. Committed group members attempt to resolve group conflicts by actively communicating information about their conflicting motives or ideologies to the rest of group, example intentions, reasons for holding certain beliefs, and by engaging in collective negotiation. Dimensions of resolution typically parallel the dimensions of conflict in the way the conflict is processed. Cognitive resolution is the way disputants understand and view the conflict, with beliefs, perspectives, understandings, and attitudes. Emotional resolution is in the way disputants feel about a conflict, the emotional energy. Behavioral resolution is reflective of how the disputants act, their behavior. Ultimately, a wide range of methods and procedures for addressing conflict exist, including negotiation, mediation, mediation-arbitration, diplomacy, and creative peace building. Dispute resolution is conflict resolution limited to law, such as arbitration and litigation processes. The concept of conflict resolution can be thought to encompass the use of nonviolent resistance measures by conflicted parties in an attempt to promote effective resolution. There are a plethora of different theories and models linked to the concept of conflict resolution. A few of them are described below. There are many examples of conflict resolution in history, and there has been a debate about the ways to conflict resolution, whether it should be forced or peaceful. Conflict resolution by peaceful means is generally perceived to be a better option. The conflict resolution curve derived from an analytical model that offers a peaceful solution by motivating conflicting entities. Forced resolution of conflict might invoke another conflict in the future. Conflict resolution curve, CRC, separates conflict styles into two separate domains, domain of competing entities and domain of accommodating entities. There is a sort of agreement between targets and aggressors on this curve. Their judgments of badness compared to goodness of each other are analogous on CRC. So, arrival of conflicting entities to some negotiable points on CRC is important before peace building. CRC does not exist, i.e., singular, in reality if the aggression of the aggressor is certain. Under such circumstances it might lead to apocalypse with mutual destruction. The curve explains why nonviolent struggles ultimately toppled repressive regimes and sometimes forced leaders to change the nature of governance. Also, this methodology has been applied to capture conflict styles on the Korean Peninsula and dynamics of negotiation processes. The dual concern model of conflict resolution is a conceptual perspective that assumes individuals' preferred method of dealing with conflict is based on two underlying themes or dimensions: concern for self, assertiveness, and concern for others, empathy. According to the model, group members balance their concern for satisfying personal needs and interests with their concern for satisfying the needs and interests of others in different ways. The intersection of these two dimensions ultimately leads individuals towards exhibiting different styles of conflict resolution. The dual model identifies 5 conflict resolution styles or strategies that individuals may use depending on their dispositions toward pro-self or pro-social goals. Avoidance conflict style. Characterized by joking, changing, or avoiding the topic, or even denying that a problem exists, the conflict avoidance style is used when an individual has withdrawn in dealing with the other party, when one is uncomfortable with conflict, or due to cultural contexts. During conflict, these avoiders adopt a wait-and-see attitude, often allowing conflict to phase out on its own without any personal involvement. By neglecting to address high-conflict situations, avoiders risk allowing problems to fester or spin out of control. Accommodating conflict style. In contrast, yielding, accommodating, smoothing or suppression conflict styles are characterized by a high level of concern for others and a low level of concern for oneself. This passive pro-social approach emerges when individuals derive personal satisfaction from meeting the needs of others and have a general concern for maintaining stable, positive social relationships. When faced with conflict, individuals with an accommodating conflict style tend to harmonize into others' demands out of respect for the social relationship. With this sense of yielding to the conflict, individuals fall back to others' input instead of finding solutions with their own intellectual resolution. Competitive conflict style. The competitive, fighting or forcing conflict style maximizes individual assertiveness, i.e., concern for self, and minimizes empathy, i.e., concern for others. Groups consisting of competitive members generally enjoy seeking domination over others, and typically see conflict as a win or lose predicament. Fighters tend to force others to accept their personal views by employing competitive power tactics, arguments, insults, accusations, or even violence, that foster intimidation. Conciliation conflict style. The conciliation, compromising, bargaining or negotiation conflict style is typical of individuals who possess an intermediate level of concern for both personal and others' outcomes. Compromisers value fairness and, in doing so, anticipate mutual give and take interactions. By accepting some demands put forth by others, compromisers believe this agreeableness will encourage others to meet them halfway, thus promoting conflict resolution. This conflict style can be considered an extension of both yielding and cooperative strategies. Cooperation conflict style. Characterized by an active concern for both pro-social and pro-self behavior, the cooperation, integration, confrontation, or problem-solving conflict style is typically used when an individual has elevated interests in their own outcomes as well as in the outcomes of others. During conflict, cooperators collaborate with others in an effort to find an amicable solution that satisfies all parties involved in the conflict. Individuals using this type of conflict style tend to be both highly assertive and highly empathetic. By seeing conflict as a creative opportunity, collaborators willingly invest time and resources into finding a win-win solution. According to the literature on conflict resolution, a cooperative conflict resolution style is recommended above all others. This resolution may be achieved by lowering the aggressor's guard while raising the ego. Relational dialectics theory, RDT, introduced by Leslie Baxter and Barbara Montgomery, 1988, explores the ways in which people in relationships use verbal communication to manage conflict and contradiction as opposed to psychology. This concept focuses on maintaining a relationship even through contradictions that arise and how relationships are managed through coordinated talk. RDT assumes that relationships are composed of opposing tendencies, are constantly changing, and tensions arises from intimate relationships. The main concepts of RDT are contradictions. The concept is that the contrary has the characteristics of its opposite. People can seek to be in a relationship but still need their space. Totality. The totality comes when the opposites unite. Thus, the relationship is balanced with contradictions and only then it reaches totality. Process. Comprehended through various social processes. These processes simultaneously continue within a relationship in a recurring manner. Praxis. The relationship progresses with experience and both people interact and communicate effectively to meet their needs. Praxis is a concept of practicability in making decisions in a relationship despite opposing wants and needs. Strategy of conflict, by Thomas Schelling, is the study of negotiation during conflict and strategic behavior that results in the development of conflict behavior. This idea is based largely on game theory. In A Reorientation of Game Theory, Schelling discusses ways in which one can redirect the focus of a conflict in order to gain advantage over an opponent. Conflict is a contest. Rational behavior, in this contest, is a matter of judgment and perception. Strategy makes predictions using rational behavior motivated by a serious calculation of advantages, a calculation that in turn is based on an explicit and internally consistent value system. Cooperation is always temporary, interests will change. Within peace and conflict studies, a definition of conflict resolution is presented in Peter Wallenstein's book Understanding Conflict Resolution. Conflict resolution is a social situation where the armed conflicting parties in a, voluntarily, agreement resolve to live peacefully with, and/or dissolve, their basic incompatibilities and henceforth cease to use arms against one another. The conflicting parties concerned in this definition are formally or informally organized groups engaged in intrastate or interstate conflict. Basic incompatibility refers to a severe disagreement between at least two sides where their demands cannot be met by the same resources at the same time. The ripeness theory by I. William Zartman introduces the concept of a ripe moment for the commencement of peace negotiations in a conflict, a necessary, but not sufficient, condition that must be fulfilled before actors in a conflict will be willing to faithfully engage in peace negotiations. The ripe moment requires a mutually hurting stalemate, MHS. All sides in a conflict must be engaged in a stalemate, such that none of the actors can successfully escalate the conflict to achieve victory. The stalemate or continuation of the conflict must also be mutually hurting according to each side's cost-benefit analyses of cost of conflict and price of unjust peace. A way out, WO. Peace-building and peace-negotiating actors can provide the necessary security that enables peace negotiation to occur. Without these features, Zartman argues that belligerents will lack the necessary motivations to pursue peace. Therefore, the sides in a conflict will either not engage in peace negotiation, or any peace will be short-lived. Approached in game theoretical terms, Zartman argues that the presence of an mutually hurting stalemate and a means of escaping the stalemate transform conflicts from a prisoner's dilemma to a chicken game. The durability of ceasefires can depend on the continued existence of a mutually enticing opportunity, MIO, and resolution of substantive grievances. Changes in the perceived cost-benefit analysis can result in resolution of intractable or decade-long conflicts, such as the Troubles. The ripeness theory has been criticized for limited predictivity when time and conditions are ripe for peace. Bottom-up theories of peace processes such as interplay theory consider additional dimensions, such as the cost-benefit analysis for actual combatants. Conflict resolution mechanisms. One theory discussed within the field of peace and conflict studies is conflict resolution mechanisms, independent procedures in which the conflicting parties can have confidence. They can be formal or informal arrangements with the intention of resolving the conflict. In understanding conflict resolution, Wallenstein draws from the works of Louis A. Kozer, Yuan Galtung, and Thomas Schelling, and presents 7 distinct theoretical mechanisms for conflict resolutions. A shift in priorities for one of the conflicting parties. While it is rare that a party completely changes its basic positions, it can display a shift into what it gives highest priority. In such an instance, new possibilities for conflict resolutions may arise. The contested resource is divided. In essence, this means both conflicting parties display some extent of shift in priorities, which then opens up for some form of meeting the other side halfway agreement. Horse trading between the conflicting parties. This means that one side gets all of its demands met on one issue, while the other side gets all of its demands met on another issue. The parties decide to share control, and rule together over the contested resource. It could be permanent, or a temporary arrangement for a transition period that, when over, has led to a transcendence of the conflict. The parties agree to leave control to someone else. In this mechanism, the primary parties agree, or accept, that a third party takes control over the contested resource. The parties resort to conflict resolution mechanisms, notably arbitration or other legal procedures. This means finding a procedure for resolving the conflict through some of the previously mentioned 5 ways, but with the added quality that it is done through a process outside of the parties' immediate control. Some issues can be left for later. The argument for this is that political conditions and popular attitudes can change, and some issues can gain from being delayed, as their significance may pale with time. Intrastate and interstate. According to conflict database Uppsala conflict data program's definition, war may occur between parties who contest an incompatibility. The nature of an incompatibility can be territorial or governmental, but a warring party must be a government of a state or any opposition organization or alliance of organizations that uses armed force to promote its position in the incompatibility in an intrastate or an interstate armed conflict. Wars can conclude with a peace agreement, which is a formal agreement, which addresses the disputed incompatibility, either by settling all or part of it, or by clearly outlining a process for how to regulate the incompatibility. A ceasefire is another form of agreement made by warring parties. Unlike a peace agreement, it only regulates the conflict behavior of warring parties, and does not resolve the issue that brought the parties to war in the first place. Peacekeeping measures may be deployed to avoid violence in solving such incompatibilities. Beginning in the last century, political theorists have been developing the theory of a global peace system that relies upon broad social and political measures to avoid war in the interest of achieving world peace. The Blue Peace approach developed by Strategic Foresight Group facilitates cooperation between countries over shared water resources, thus reducing the risk of war and enabling sustainable development. Conflict resolution is an expanding field of professional practice, both in the US and around the world. The escalating costs of conflict have increased use of third parties who may serve as a conflict specialists to resolve conflicts. In fact, relief and development organizations have added peacebuilding specialists to their teams. Many major international non-governmental organizations have seen a growing need to hire practitioners trained in conflict analysis and resolution. Furthermore, this expansion has resulted in the need for conflict resolution practitioners to work in a variety of settings such as in businesses, court systems, government agencies, nonprofit organizations, and educational institutions throughout the world. Democracy has a positive influence on conflict resolution. According to the Cambridge Dictionary, a basic definition of conflict is an active disagreement between people with opposing opinions or principles. Conflicts such as disagreements may occur at any moment, being a normal part of human interactions. The type of conflict and its severity may vary both in content and degree of seriousness. However, it is impossible to completely avoid it. Actually, conflict in itself is not necessarily a negative thing. When handled constructively, it can help people to stand up for themselves and others, to evolve and learn how to work together to achieve a mutually satisfactory solution. But if conflict is handled poorly, it can cause anger, hurt, divisiveness, and more serious problems. If it is impossible to completely avoid conflict, as it was said, the possibilities to experience it are usually higher, particularly in complex social contexts in which important diversities are at stake. Especially because of this reason, speaking about conflict resolution becomes fundamental in ethnically diverse and multicultural work environments, in which not only regular work disagreements may occur but in which also different languages, worldviews, lifestyles, and ultimately value differences may diverge. Conflict resolution is the process by which two or more parties engaged in a disagreement, dispute, or debate reach an agreement resolving it. It involves a series of stages, involved actors, models, and approaches that may depend on the kind of confrontation at stake and the surrounded social and cultural context. However, there are some general actions and personal skills that may be very useful when facing a conflict to solve, independently of its nature, e.g. an open-minded orientation able to analyze the different point of views and perspectives involved, as well as an ability to empathize, carefully listen, and clearly communicate with all the parts involved. Sources of conflict may be so many, depending on the particular situation and the specific context, but some of the most common include personal differences such as values, ethics, personalities, age, education, gender, socioeconomic status, cultural background, temperament, health, religion, political beliefs, etc. Thus, almost any social category that serves to differentiate people may become an object of conflict when it does negatively diverge with people who do not share it. Clashes of ideas, choices, or actions. Conflict occurs when people does not share common goals, or common ways to reach a particular objective, e.g. different work styles. Conflict occurs also when there is direct or indirect competition between people, or when someone may feel excluded from a particular activity or by some people within the company. Lack of communication or poor communication are also significant reasons to start a conflict, to misunderstand a particular situation and to create potentially explosive interactions. Fundamental strategies. Although different conflicts may require different ways to handle them, This is a list of fundamental strategies that may be implemented when handling a conflictive situation. Reaching agreement on rules and procedures. Establishing ground rules may include the following actions: a. Determining a site for the meeting. b. Setting a formal agenda. c. Determining who attends. d. Setting time limits. e. Setting procedural rules. f. Following specific do-s and don't-s. Reducing tension and synchronizing the de-escalation of hostility. In highly emotional situations, when people feel angry, upset, frustrated, it is important to implement the following actions: a. Separating the involved parties. b. Managing tensions, jokes as an instrument to give the opportunity for catharsis. c. Acknowledging others' feelings, actively listening to others. d. De-escalation by public statements by parties, about the concession, the commitments of the parties. Improving the accuracy of communication, particularly improving each party's understanding of the other's perception. a. Accurate understanding of the other's position. b. Role reversal, trying to adopt the other's position, empathetic attitudes. c. Imaging, describing how they see themselves, how the other parties appears to them, how they think the other parties will describe them, and how the others see themselves. Controlling the number and size of issues in the discussion. a. Fractionate the negotiation, a method that divides a large conflict into smaller parts. 1. Reduce the number of parties on each side. 2. Control the number of substantive issues. 3. Search for different ways to divide big issues. Establishing common ground where parties can find a basis for agreement. a. Establishing common goals or superordinate goals. b. Establishing common enemies. c. Identifying common expectations. d. Managing time constraints and deadlines. e. Reframing the parties' view of each other. f. Build trust through the negotiation process. Enhancing the desirability of the options and alternatives that each party presents to the other. a. Giving the other party an acceptable proposal. b. Asking for a different decision. c. Sweeten the other rather than intensifying the threat. d. Elaborating objective or legitimate criteria to evaluate all possible solutions. Approaches. A conflict is a common phenomenon in the workplace. As mentioned before, it can occur because of the most different grounds of diversity and under very different circumstances. However, it is usually a matter of interests, needs, priorities, goals or values interfering with each other, and, often, a result of different perceptions more than actual differences. Conflicts may involve team members, departments, projects, organization and client, boss and subordinate, organization needs versus personal needs, and they are usually immersed in complex relations of power that need to be understood and interpreted in order to define the more tailored way to manage the conflict. There are, nevertheless, some main approaches that may be applied when trying to solve a conflict that may lead to very different outcomes to be valued according to the particular situation and the available negotiation resources. Forcing. When one of the conflict's parts firmly pursues his or her own concerns despite the resistance of the other, this may involve pushing one viewpoint at the expense of another or maintaining firm resistance to the counterpart's actions. It is also commonly known as competing. Forcing may be appropriate when all other, less forceful methods, do not work or are ineffective, when someone needs to stand up for his/her own rights, or the represented group/organization's rights, resist aggression and pressure. It may be also considered a suitable option when a quick resolution is required and using force is justified, e.g. in a life-threatening situation, to stop an aggression, and as a very last resort to resolve a long-lasting conflict. However, forcing may also negatively affect the relationship with the opponent in the long run, may intensify the conflict if the opponent decides to react in the same way, even if it was not the original intention. It does not allow to take advantage in a productive way of the other side's position and, last but not least, Taking this approach may require a lot of energy and be exhausting to some individuals. Win-win/collaborating. Collaboration involves an attempt to work with the other part involved in the conflict to find a win-win solution to the problem in hand, or at least to find a solution that most satisfies the concerns of both parties. The win-win approach sees conflict resolution as an opportunity to come to a mutually beneficial result, and it includes identifying the underlying concerns of the opponents and finding an alternative which meets each party's concerns. From that point of view, it is the most desirable outcome when trying to solve a problem for all partners. Collaborating may be the best solution when consensus and commitment of other parties is important, when the conflict occurs in a collaborative, trustworthy environment, and when it is required to address the interests of multiple stakeholders. But more especially, it is the most desirable outcome when a long-term relationship is important so that people can continue to collaborate in a productive way. Collaborating is, in few words, sharing responsibilities and mutual commitment. For parties involved, the outcome of the conflict resolution is less stressful. However, the process of finding and establishing a win-win solution may be longer and should be very involving. It may require more effort and more time than some other methods. For the same reason, collaborating may not be practical when timing is crucial and a quick solution or fast response is required. Compromising. Different from the win-win solution, in this outcome the conflict parties find a mutually acceptable solution which partially satisfies both parties. This can occur as both parties converse with one another and seek to understand the other's point of view. Compromising may be an optimal solution when the goals are moderately important and not worth the use of more assertive or more involving approaches. It may be useful when reaching temporary settlement on complex issues and as a first step when the involved parties do not know each other well or have not yet developed a high level of mutual trust. Compromising may be a faster way to solve things when time is a factor. The level of tensions can be lower as well, but the result of the conflict may be also less satisfactory. If this method is not well managed, and the factor time becomes the most important one, the situation may result in both parties being not satisfied with the outcome, i.e. a lose-lose situation. Moreover, it does not contribute to building trust in the long run, and it may require a closer monitoring of the kind of partially satisfactory compromises acquired. Withdrawing. This technique consists on not addressing the conflict, postpone it, or simply withdrawing. For that reason, it is also known as avoiding. This outcome is suitable when the issue is trivial and not worth the effort, or when more important issues are pressing, and one or both the parties do not have time to deal with it. Withdrawing may be also a strategic response when it is not the right time or place to confront the issue, when more time is needed to think and collect information before acting, or when not responding may bring still some winnings for at least some of the involved parties. Moreover, withdrawing may be also employed when someone knows that the other party is totally engaged with hostility and does not want, cannot, to invest further unreasonable efforts. Withdrawing may give the possibility to see things from a different perspective while gaining time and collecting further information, and specially is a low-stress approach, particularly when the conflict is a short-time one. However, not acting may be interpreted as an agreement, and therefore it may lead to weakening or losing a previously gained position with one or more parties involved. Furthermore, when using withdrawing as a strategy, more time, skills, and experiences together with other actions may need to be implemented. Smoothing. Smoothing is accommodating the concerns of others first of all, rather than one's own concerns. This kind of strategy may be applied when the issue of the conflict is much more important for the counterparts, whereas for the other is not particularly relevant. It may be also applied when someone accepts that he/she is wrong, and furthermore there are no other possible options than continuing an unworthy competing pushing situation. Just as withdrawing, smoothing may be an option to find at least a temporal solution or obtain more time and information. However, it is not an option when priority interests are at stake. There is a high risk of being abused when choosing the smoothing option. Therefore, it is important to keep the right balance and to not give up one's own interests and necessities. Otherwise, confidence in one's ability, mainly with an aggressive opponent, may be seriously damaged, together with credibility by the other parties involved. Needed to say, in these cases a transition to a win-win solution in the future becomes particularly more difficult when someone between organizations. Relationships between organizations, such as strategic alliances, buyer-supplier partnerships, organizational networks, or joint ventures are prone to conflict. Conflict resolution in inter-organizational relationships has attracted the attention of business and management scholars. They have related the forms of conflict, example integrity-based versus competence-based conflict, to the mode of conflict resolution and the negotiation and repair approaches used by organizations. They have also observed the role of important moderating factors such as the type of contractual arrangement, the level of trust between organizations, or the type of power asymmetry. Other forms. Conflict management refers to the long-term management of intractable conflicts. It is the label for the variety of ways by which people handle grievances, standing up for what they consider to be right and against what they consider to be wrong. Those ways include such diverse phenomena as gossip, ridicule, lynching, terrorism, warfare, feuding, genocide, law, mediation, and avoidance. Which forms of conflict management will be used in any given situation can be somewhat predicted and explained by the social structure or social geometry of the case. Conflict management is often considered to be distinct from conflict resolution. In order for actual conflict to occur, there should be an expression of exclusive patterns which explain why and how the conflict was expressed the way it was. Conflict is often connected to a previous issue. Resolution refers to resolving a dispute to the approval of one or both parties, whereas management is concerned with an ongoing process that may never have a resolution. Neither is considered the same as conflict transformation, which seeks to reframe the positions of the conflict parties. Counseling. When personal conflict leads to frustration and loss of efficiency, counseling may prove helpful. Although few organizations can afford to have professional counselors on staff, given some training, managers may be able to perform this function. Non-directive counseling, or listening with understanding, is little more than being a good listener, something often considered to be important in a manager. Sometimes simply being able to express one's feelings to a concerned and understanding listener is enough to relieve frustration and make it possible for an individual to advance to a problem-solving frame of mind. The non-directive approach is one effective way for managers to deal with frustrated subordinates and co-workers. There are other, more direct, and more diagnostic, methods that could be used in appropriate circumstances. However, the great strength of the non-directive approach lies in its simplicity, its effectiveness, and that it deliberately avoids the manager-counselors diagnosing and interpreting emotional problems, which would call for special psychological training. Listening to staff with sympathy and understanding is unlikely to escalate the problem, and is a widely used approach for helping people cope with problems that interfere with their effectiveness in the workplace. Culture-based. Conflict resolution as both a professional practice and academic field is highly sensitive to cultural practices. In Western cultural contexts, such as Canada and the United States, successful conflict resolution usually involves fostering communication among disputants, problem solving, and drafting agreements that meet underlying needs. In these situations, conflict resolvers often talk about finding a mutually satisfying, win-win, solution for everyone involved. In many non-Western cultural contexts, such as Afghanistan, Vietnam, and China, it is also important to find win-win solutions. However, the routes taken to find them may be very different. In these contexts, direct communication between disputants that explicitly addresses the issues at stake in the conflict can be perceived as very rude, making the conflict worse and delaying resolution. It can make sense to involve religious, tribal, or community leaders, communicate difficult truths through a third party, or make suggestions through stories. Intercultural conflicts are often the most difficult to resolve because the expectations of the disputants can be very different, and there is much occasion for misunderstanding. In animals, Conflict resolution has also been studied in non-humans, including dogs, cats, monkeys, snakes, elephants, and primates. Aggression is more common among relatives and within a group than between groups. Instead of creating distance between the individuals, primates tend to be more intimate in the period after an aggressive incident. These intimacies consist of grooming and various forms of body contact. Stress responses, including increased heart rates, usually decrease after these reconciliatory signals. Different types of primates, as well as many other species who live in groups, display different types of conciliatory behavior. Resolving conflicts that threaten the interaction between individuals in a group is necessary for survival, giving it a strong evolutionary value. A further focus of this is among species that have stable social units, individual relationships, and the potential for intragroup aggression that may disrupt beneficial relationships. The role of these reunions in negotiating relationships is examined along with the susceptibility of these relationships to partner value asymmetries and biological market effects. These findings contradict previous existing theories about the general function of aggression, i.e., creating space between individuals, first proposed by Konrad Lorenz, which seems to be more the case in conflicts between groups than it is within groups. In addition to research in primates, biologists are beginning to explore reconciliation in other animals. Until recently, the literature dealing with reconciliation in non-primates has consisted of anecdotal observations and very little quantitative data. Although peaceful post-conflict behavior had been documented going back to the 1960s, it was not until 1993 that Rowell made the first explicit mention of reconciliation in feral sheep. Reconciliation has since been documented in spotted hyenas, lions, bottlenose dolphins, dwarf mongoose, domestic goats, domestic dogs, and, recently, in red-necked wallabies. Thank you for watching this video.